Welcome to this week's edition of Focus on Connecticut. I'm Tom Appleby, and this week we're going to talk with two members of the Education Committee. Lots of issues that they've been dealing with. Let me introduce them to you. State Senator Gail Schlossberg is a Democrat from the 14th District. That includes Milford, Orange, West Haven, and Woodbridge. And State Representative Pam Staneski is a Republican, 119th District, Orange and Milford. So we have a lot of crossover here, not only in the committee, but of where you live and represent. Thank you for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Pam. Glad to be here.
Lots of issues that touch a lot of people here, and we were chatting before the program. There seems to be a lot of agreement on this committee. Democrat, Republican, doesn't matter. The issues tend to be ones that you come together on. One of the hot ones this year was delaying enrollment in kindergarten. Some parents want to hold their kids back. This is a hot potato issue. Where do we stand on it?
Yeah, you know, a lot of people refer to this as called red shirting, and the idea is that you hold your kids back so that they'll have an advantage athletically or academically or socially. And it's gotten to the point where we have a lot of communities where kids are 7 years old starting kindergarten, and they're sitting next to a kid who's, you know, just turned 5. And there's a 7-year-old there in the kindergarten classroom.
And at those ages, that's huge.
That's a huge difference, you know, a very significant difference in a lot of different ways. And so we have a piece of legislation that says that, you know, you can't hold your kid until they're you know, you have to send them before they're 7, unless there's a developmental delay or there's some significant reason why you should be holding that child back. So
is there agreement on this one?
There is agreement on this one, absolutely. And as we were talking before the show, that week that I spent in that first grade classroom substituting, you could see
that you are a former teacher.
Yeah, I am. But I don't think that it's a no-brainer. When you talk about the developmental differences between a 5-year-old and a 7-year-old, it's crucial that that teacher actually is able to teach to a class that's close in those developmental abilities. So yes, there's agreement on it.
Did this loosen up when I was a kid? When I had my kids, there were rules about when they could or could not enter kindergarten.
There were rules about when you entered, right. But it was always, you know, to not send them too soon. You had to be, you know, 5 at a certain period of time. It wasn't really about how late would you hold them, because, you know, in most families it really wasn't a question. It's just evolved over time. As our world has become more competitive, we've now pushed that competitiveness down to our youngest kids and said to them, okay, well now how am I going to get a competitive advantage for you? And they're being held back as a result of that. So I really think it's a function of outside forces and the competitive nature of our world.
Another hot issue, and we were chatting a bit about this before the program, excluding student performance results on master exams from teacher evaluations. So in other words, a teacher is not going to be judged based on how the student does on the mastery tests. This is something that the committee felt strongly about. Lots of groups oppose this.
Well, if you look at who's opposing this, I think that they need to have a better understanding about what we are doing with education. It's not, we're not putting widgets out. Each classroom is different, and as I said in the committee, I believe there's a process already there for evaluations. An administrator, and what we need to do is free up an administrator's time so they're spending more time with that teacher in that classroom, helping that teacher become a master teacher and improving teaching and learning. And then we need to hold that administrator responsible if that's not happening. I just had an opportunity to be with a young man who's teaching at Foreign High School. He's been there for 4 years. He was a graduate of West Haven, and he said that his evaluations when his administrator comes into the room and he sits there are much more beneficial to him as a teacher and to the students and to the teaching and learning when he has that dialogue. To actually put 1 day in time at 22% or more on their evaluation is unfair to the teacher.
What you're referring to is that 22% of a teacher's evaluations depending on 1 day of testing.
1 day of testing, and it's a test that is a standardized test. Nobody's saying that we should be getting rid of standardized tests. They have a place, they really do. But when you're looking at teaching and learning on a day-to-day basis, there are many more measures that could measure a teacher's ability to provide growth over time to a student, and also mechanisms to not put that fear and that pressure on them to teach to this test. Anytime you're going to put a quarter of your evaluation is on one piece, you're going to make sure, I mean I would, my job's on the line, I'd make sure that that one piece was in place. That's 25%. So there's mechanisms there, and there are many more opportunities for true evaluation
this
of our teachers.
22% didn't come out of the
I
the blue. I mean, it was, people decided. I assume the education.
Okay, so
people
let's
decided.
back up for a second and just get a few basic things clear as to what's really going on here. In 2012, we had education reform that was largely driven by what was happening in the federal government by No Child Left Behind. As a result of those federal requirements, the state was required to tie teacher evaluations to the outcomes on these statewide mastery exams, which in Connecticut, people refer to them, it's Smarter Balance Test or the SBAC test. What has happened now is the federal government, under the Every Student Succeeds Act, the new federal law, has said you don't have to use those anymore. So the feds have backed off. They've said, states, you decide. So we as a state now are looking at this, and the Education Committee is saying, we're not saying get rid of all testing, we're not saying teachers should not be evaluated on testing or even on standardized testing. What this bill does, Senate Bill 380, is very, very narrowly says this one test, the Smarter Balance Test, which we've just put out last year for the very first time and is getting changed again this year, that one test should not be used as part of a teacher's evaluation. We're still figuring out if this makes a lot of sense. Right. Last year we abandoned it and we changed it for an SAT instead. So
got to take a break, but we'll continue this discussion right after this. Don't go away. Welcome back to Focus on Connecticut. We've been chatting about the topic we just were discussing on air, and you wanted to clarify something.
Yeah, so when we talk about the teacher evaluation system, there was an evaluation system put in place in 2012, and so 22.5% of a teacher's evaluation included standardized testing and a number of standardized items, one of which is the statewide mastery, or the SBAC. And as I was saying, all we are doing in our legislation is doing exactly what the federal government has said we can do, and which most other states are now doing as well, is taking that SBAC out of a teacher's evaluation. There'll still be standardized testing. We'll still want to make sure that we can look at student growth. We want to know if in a classroom students are learning more from September until June. We want to be able to see that growth. We want to be able to see that with a teacher and have those conversations and evaluate a teacher on that basis. But we also want to make sure that we're getting good and valuable information. We're not convinced of that yet, that this SBAC test actually does that. It literally just gives you one line. So I think that's where there's a lot of confusion. The mastery test used to give us a lot of strands and say, okay, Johnny's good in subtraction, but really can't add. And we would get the strands of education. What were the skills that were actually being taught well, or where that student was struggling? This SBAC test doesn't do that. It gives you one line. It says your student is level 3 in English and level 4 in math, and that's it. We can't even deliver them within the school year. It's one test, it doesn't come back even during the school year, and it doesn't inform teaching. So we don't think it should be connected to teacher evaluations.
Another bit of legislation that you discussed this session was prohibit inclusion of participation rates in the master exams in calculating a district's accountability index score. Is this more of the same?
It also goes back to, as the senator was saying, the federal government's changing the requirements through Every Student Succeed Act, and we know that you should not prohibit money going back to a district funding if they don't reach the 95% rate.
So it sounds like we're trying to level the field again. We weren't happy with what the federal government was asking us to do, and now we're making amends.
Well, we're having a little bit of a challenge with the State Department of Education, or a disagreement with the State Department of Education.
We being the committee.
We being the committee, the General Assembly, on this particular issue. You know, the federal government has told us two things at the same time. One, you need to have a 95% participation rate of every school has to have 95% of their students actually participate in taking the SBAC test. But on the other hand, they do allow for an opt-out. Mm-hmm. So there's a mixed message that we are getting, but we have been told as a state, you need to get up to that 95%. Our State Department of Education has taken it one step further, and they now want to be able to say, well, you know what, if your school is not at 95% participation, we are going to withhold funds from you. And we all think that's wrong. We don't think that, there should be a basis for it.
And how do you opt out? I assume it's a parent's choice.
It is.
And that's it. My kid is not taking another test. Thank you very much.
And to capture what the senator was saying, at one point there was discussion about not just at the school level, but also when you talk about small communities within the school, when you're talking about special education, or you're talking about English language learners. And you could very well have a school that doesn't have a population big enough to, you have one person missing and you miss the 95%. Participation rate. So.
And what's the leverage? How do you get a parent to come on board with this if they don't want to do it?
Well, I think right now that's sort of the challenge, that the difference that we're having with the State Department of Education. They're going out and actively campaigning for schools and parents and families to participate in this. And so on the one hand, they've got a marketing campaign that's being promoted, and on the other hand, they are threatening the loss of funds to various districts, which we don't support, which is why we've been trying to clarify this through legislation, because there is a disconnect. And after the new federal legislation, there are going to be new regulations coming,
what does
and
the
those
State
aren't
Board
clear.
of Ed say when someone says, look, I couldn't get 95%, there's nothing I can do, they're refusing to do it? Do they say, well, just tough, you're not going to get your money?
Well, they did. That was again, it was the carrot stick approach. When I was on the Board of Education, we very much looked at, while it wasn't SBAC or Smarter Balance, it was actually our CMT scores and our participation rate, and where we were going to be put on notice for a year, and after that year there were going to be penalties that came in to play. So they did hold that carrot stick piece over you. You do this and you get that money. And when you have schools where participation rate is an issue, and yet you need the funding because they're low performing schools, low income students, ELL students, it really, to me, they were working against their philosophy that education for all, and we're going to provide the resources.
We're going to take another break. When we come back, welcome back to Focus on Connecticut. I'm Tom Appleby. We're talking with two members of the Education Committee of the Legislature. I'll reintroduce them to you. Pam Staneski is a Republican from the 119th District, and Gail Schlossberg, a Democrat from the 14th District. Senator, Representative, school climate. You voted on a study, not something being done, a study of school climate, which includes bullying, school safety, and social emotional learning.
Yeah, this is
your baby.
This is something that's really important that needs to be addressed. You know, when we look at schools across the state, across the country, and across the world, what school communities, where are kids really achieving? Where do we have those kids coming out of those schools who are really exceptional? And you can trace it back to any school that has great school leadership and a great school climate, which doesn't mean, as you said, you know, how is the weather? Is it warm enough or cool enough in the classroom? It really has to do with how, you know, what are the feelings that are happening in the school? Are people respected and valued? Are they inspired? Are they passionate? Are they held to high standards? Is there a sense of, you are a teacher, you are a professional, and we have certain standards that we expect of you, and just like that, you know, as a student, there's something to take back.
But is this the school, or is this the community in which the school is located?
Well, I think that it's the school community, and that's really what we're talking about. It's about creating a school community where everyone buys into this notion that you have to have a positive school environment where people are inspired and respected in order to have school achievement. You know, I'm sure you know here in our jobs or in school, if kids are stressed out, if they're angry, if they're worried about something happening at home, they're not going to learn math so well. It's a lot harder to achieve when you're upset about something. If you had a fight with your wife on your way to work in the morning, you get to work, you may be a little bit cranky. You may not be you will not be as productive as you might otherwise be when things are going well. We have a lot of kids who come to school and live in really tough circumstances. And even in our high achieving schools, kids are stressed out. We see that all over the place. We see bullying. We see, unfortunately, we've seen a number of deaths in our state, both with students and teachers. We have to change that. We have to change that paradigm, and we have to create positive school communities where kids and teachers are coming to school and have the ability to actually achieve and learn.
And to the Senator's point, at one point when, again, on the Board of Education, we looked at our school climate, and yes, the state had passed a bullying law and put in a bullying box that you could report, but that wasn't enough. That was just saying, we're identifying we have this issue, but how are you going to address it? And it was about having conversations and forums in the classrooms, in the school setting. And when you talk about the school community, I think to your point, when you do something to make this a positive experience in the school environment, it actually does branch out to the surrounding community. What we found was that when we talked to children and young adults in our high schools who said that, well, I don't feel comfortable here, if we partnered them with a caring adult from whatever point in that life where they said, I don't feel comfortable, that we found results. We found that they came to school ready. They had somebody they could go to, not necessarily on an academic issue, but a personal issue that they could trust, and that trust allowed them to come into the environment to learn and not come in there with issues that were just sitting on their shoulders. And so that is one thing that we did in Milford. And to the Senator's point, it's something we need to be practicing through the state.
Just a few minutes left with our guests. We want the best people in the classroom, and you're looking for ways to do that. You've come up with a pilot program for a student seeking a college ed degree. You're looking to recruit and retain early childhood educators and establish a task force to study and develop strategies to increase and improve recruitment, preparation, retention of minority teachers. That's a lot on everybody's plate. We have an issue, I guess, in the state in trying to get people to first enter the profession, and then when they're in it, to stay in it.
Yeah, it's a big challenge for us in all of these areas to try to get teachers to teach. This is an issue across the nation, though, so we are not unique in this way. But as we are going through this process and identifying where our teacher shortage areas, we are actively looking for ways to bring them in. We're also looking for more manufacturing teachers as well, as we see the need for more skilled teaching and education and being able to develop a high quality workforce here in our state. So we have all of these things going forward, trying different ways to address it, because as we look across the country, there isn't any particular model that seems to be working. But we want to say to people and to young people, teaching is a great career. It is something that is noble and valuable, and we will respect and value you, again, which is why I think it's really important that we decouple that SBAC test from the evaluations. We'd be the only state in the nation to have that.
Speaking as a former teacher, what's needed?
Well, I agree with the Senator with respect to engaging young people in knowing that it's a profession that you should be proud of. I think that we need to also look at teacher prep. I would like to see these young people who say, I want to be a teacher, get into a classroom and maybe practice a little bit. Engage with students, peers that are younger than them, and see what it is to be there.
You're saying before they even enter the the education program?
Yes, and that's what I think. That's part of what we're trying to do is say, hey, this is a great experience for you. And if I'd like to go back to how the school climate actually works with this in my mind, because if you have a positive, safe environment and kids are in there and they're seeing good things happening and they have a role model and they have a mentor and they're saying, wow, I really like this. You're passionate about this job. You're passionate about me. You care about me. Then it makes them want to say, I think I want to emulate that. I'd like to do that. And so it ties into us looking at manufacturing teachers, us looking at recruiting minority teachers, us looking at what we can do to engage young people in saying, this is a profession that I want to take on as I go through my career, as I grow up.
Challenges. Our challenges, we've run out of time, but I have so many more issues to bring up, so I urge you to come back and discuss them.
Thank you.
Thank you
for
so
having
much.
us.
Thank you for joining us. Please stay tuned. The news continues.